Mark, welcome aboard to the show. So happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we started to talk about the kids, and I was like, no, stop, stop, stop. We want to record this. This is gonna be good. You were saying that the job is the boss. What do you mean by that?
Okay. My kids started down the path of being addicted to gaming. Okay. So just to give you a little background, my daughter, my oldest one, I have four kids. My oldest daughter was graduating from a grade school and middle school, then going into high school, but through grade school, middle school, very high honors. So she was shadowing surgeons at the local hospital in our town, going into high school. Okay. And then I had a parent teacher conference, and I normally wouldn't go because I work hard. I work 18-hour days, and not I don't look at the clock. I don't think about the time. I just know the job is the boss. And essentially, I was asked to do this parent teacher conference because I was coming through town, and I said okay. And I swung by and I ran into a friend. Our kids grew up together since preschool. I said, "Hey, Tom, are you here for the parent teacher conference?" He said, "What are you talking about?" And I thought that was odd, and I went to the first teacher and I said, "Are all parents required to be here for this parent teacher conference?" She says, "No, only select parents." So I had three meetings back to back with my three boys. And she went on to show me the file, D's and F's. And not only was my oldest son failing miserably, but he was disruptive in class. And, you know, I I went down that path, the Snoopy sitcom where the teacher goes, want, 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 want. I went down that, and I knew gaming was a problem, because I would leave on a Saturday, say, and come back 8, 10 hours later, and I would come back home and see the kids were still in front of the screen. And I would say, "Hey, have you been here the whole time?" And they'd look at me like zombies. And it was very disheartening. I'd turn that off and I'd be this bad guy, this, maniac unplugging TVs and telling them to get outside. It didn't take long for them to hear them running around, playing and laughing outside. But ultimately, my wife didn't have the voice, of she's I scream at them, I tell them 1,000 times, turn it off and go out. And so what I what I realized after this parent teacher conference, having three meetings back to back, getting the same message, I was driving home and I was shaking. I was shaking, and I got home and I ripped the cables out of the wall. I lost my shit. And my wife said, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? What's going on?" And I took all the electronics and I said, "If you can't see what's happening here, our daughter's going to be traveling around the world as a brain surgeon, and our boys are going to be living at home in their 50s." And so I called the boys in and I asked my oldest son, "What's 7 times 7?" And he was thinking about it, like 7 plus 7. I said, "No, son, you're doing long division and, you're working harder, not smarter." But the simple solution was this, is that I went to the dollar store and I got flashcards. And then when they got in the car, turned the radio on, I turned it off and said spelling words. And they all graduated with honors. Okay. Now, did they like me? No, they hated me. It is like a drug, when they can't get their fix. But I said, you're going to earn the right to play video games, right? And then this was really important. They would race off to other people's houses because if I didn't pick them up from school, they'd jump in somebody else's car. And then I would get home and say, "Where are the boys? I need to see the homework." I try to get this routine. And here, will you speak about this intrinsic motivation? Love that. I really did. What you're doing with your
Guilty,
kids
guilty.
is so foundational, so powerful. And they may not thank you 20 years from now, you know?
I'm not expecting them to. I'm kind of planning on that I'm not.
Yes, yes. And so because we care, it's because we don't want to just look the other way and ignore the warning signs. It's like having an idiot light come up on your car and you just tap on it, it'll go away. No, it's destined to be a bigger problem. It's just you don't ignore the idiot lights, in your life. So I was arguing with my wife constantly and other parents. And I would call and say, "I just want to make sure the boys are doing their homework together before they are in front of a screen." And they'd say, "Boys will be boys." And I'd hang up the phone, get in the car, go over there, get in the car. And my kids would be so angry because they were in the middle of a game, right? A Halo game or whatever it might be. And then what I realized is that I couldn't control their time as much as I wanted to see them start to succeed in school. And so I put them in sports. And this is really critical for a lot of parents. I said, my kids didn't have to like the sport. It was soccer, it was baseball, it was football, whatever it was. But here's what is so foundational to team sports is the coach is like the manager or the boss or the owner of the company. The teammates are like the coworkers. The people in the stands are the customers. See, when those kids enter that field, if they don't give 100%, everybody lets them know it. And that's life, right? There's no shortcuts to that. You're always on display. Your work ethics are always on display. And when people don't, you know, make the cut, they get benched. They get,
There's
sent.
this philosophy of they're children, let's let them be children, let's let them be boys, kind of create this protected environment. What's your philosophy? I mean, should we protect the children, or should we expose them to what life will be so they're ready for it? How do we kind of think through this?
Okay. This is what I would say is that in my personal opinion, I think boys are being raised like girls. Like, okay, just imagine, put kids in a room. This is what happened to me. I was labeled at a very young age. And, I didn't do well in school. I was just bouncing off the walls. ADH, they have all these, terms. And I think young boys are being labeled at the earliest ages because you could gather girls and boys in a room, and the girls, they sit and start massaging each other and doing each other's hair, and they're just totally content in that room where the kids are just, I mean, they're crawling out of their skin. It's like, get me out of here. They need to get out and exert this energy because, the testosterone starts shooting through your veins. And, it's brutal to be in that environment where you're expected to just sit still and focus, right? I know what it was like for me. I got labeled at a very, very young age, and I got kicked out of school for fighting. And then I was transferred to another school, and I was kicked out for selling drugs within a week. Um, and I was a feral kid, but then I was introduced to girls, and I was jumping out of a window at 2 in the morning, stealing my mom's boyfriend's car to deliver powdered donuts to a girl that I was infatuated with. And when you're in that state, and then the girls, they just know how to play that, in such a level that you just can't think straight. You can't sleep. And so that's an addiction like a drug. But I think we need to prepare our boys and our girls for this time in life that this kind of stuff takes place. And ultimately, a counselor came beside me and said, he had talked to my fifth probation officer, okay, and just before even entering high school, and I was going to spend the rest of my life in and out of the system, right, and as most of my family members and friends were doing. So I thought this is the natural, you know, route that you take, in this environment that I'm in. And he says, school's not for everybody. And he goes, the difference between a job and a career. And mind you, like, he called me out of class on a Friday. Okay, this was the third school that they had transferred me to. Said, this is your last stop. If you're not going to make this work, you're going to juvenile hall, and you're going to be the ward of the court. And I said, okay. And I didn't really care, you know. And the system, honestly, when you're in juvenile hall, you run into friends, you run into people, and you play cards, and you play basketball, and you're just navigating life, you know, in an environment that's locked down. But it's not something that really intimidates you, not to get in trouble. So anyway, he calls me out of class on a Friday, and I'm thinking, okay, my probation officer is going to be there, law enforcement's going to be there. I'm going to get handcuffed. I'm checking myself for drugs, and I'm going, okay, why am I getting called out of class on a Friday? Because generally speaking, the only reason you get called out of a class in my situation is that you're in trouble. So I go to the counselor's office, Mr. Ostras, I'll never forget. And he says, hey, Mark, how are you? And he just talked to me like a normal kid that wasn't in all this trouble. And he says, At this school, we have a lot of electives. And he goes, school's not for everybody. Obviously, I was failing miserably, like my boys were. And he goes, do you know the difference between a job and a career? And I never heard the term career before. And I said, why am I here? I mean, I was looking over my shoulder because I was a runner. He had to catch me first. And so, I just was kind of trying to figure out why, what are we here for? So he says, look, we have electives that other schools don't have. We have automotive, we have, photography. And he went down through the list. He goes, pick something that you would be really interested in. See, a career is something that you actually enjoy and they pay you for it. And a job is the grind, but sometimes you got to get through the jobs to get to the career. And so he explained this to me. He says, take this trade publication home and let's talk about it on Monday. So I put it in my backpack, classroom, finished the day, and then partied all weekend. Okay. I did acid that weekend and I was a zombie on Monday. I was, my family and friends were very much into drugs. Okay. So I was exposed to it at a very young age. And I'm glad that I didn't like it. I'm glad that my body chemistry, like, I could do a drug and get all the side effects where you could do all the drug and get all the benefits. And so when I was on the drugs, I was like, when is it going to be over? The meth and the coke and the pot and all that stuff that you do that you get exposed to in this environment that I grew up in. And so I was thankful for that. But on that weekend, I come back Monday, he called me out of class and I like, oh my gosh, he gave me that publication, never even looked at it. And then I'm walking down the corridor and I'm just flipping through the pages, not even really taking in what I'm looking at. And I walk into his office and he goes, so, Mr. Stofer, what do you think? You know? And I said, I want to be an electrician. And I have no idea, none, where that came from. I just want to give him an answer. Right. And he just said, that's great. He was so excited. He was okay. We got a plan. And I was like, okay, all right. And I left there telling everybody that I was going to be an electrician, that I was going to Central County Occupational Center. But what's funny, this is funny because I had passed that vocational center hundreds of times while it was under construction. And I didn't know what it was, but that was in my route to the ghetto that I would do my drug dealings, you know, and I would party with friends and, it was just the ghetto behind, this trade school, the Central County Occupational Center. And I'm like, that's what that place is, you know? And it just like, wow, okay. And then I'm going to that school. I'm going to that because I'm familiar with it. And if I was familiar with it when it came to a school, it was that my objective was to break in and steal food at the cafeteria, cook something, spend the night on the roof, whatever. It was just being a feral kid that had no direction. And so when he says, look, if you just show up and try, if you just show up and try, I can get you into this trade school that a lot of adults pay a lot of money to go to this school and you can learn a career that you enjoy and get paid well for it. And it changed my life forever. That moment changed my life forever. And I want to add too that when you live in this environment that I lived in, it's quite depressing. You can get really high on some stuff and then just feel like that, you know, life is amazing. And you come down and you're like, it really is less than amazing, a lot less than amazing. And it's very depressing. And it doesn't end well for a lot of folks that continue that lifestyle. And so with that, I just separated myself that weekend. After that weekend, I just disappeared. I literally disappeared from my family and my friends because they were such a bad influence in my life. And I took on not only the trade school, but also sports. So I lived at the school. I didn't want them to close the doors. I just wanted to keep learning electrical maintenance. I didn't have the math skills to be an electrician, but I did take electrical maintenance and I loved it. I was the teacher's pet. I was helping other students. It gave me purpose, this intrinsic motivation that you talk about, this intrinsic motivation. And how do we reach the heart and mind of these young, adults, young kids that just don't have any direction? and they're sitting in front of that flat screen. My concern right now, my passion right now is to help 7, 8 million men in their prime that seem to wake up every day having no purpose, you know, and we need them. Man, we need them in the trades. If you're in the trades, you're worth your weight in gold. We need them. And I think, gosh, what are they doing? And I would say this is 7, 8 million men in their prime not working. Most of them probably spend way too much time in front of a flat screen. And if that's the motivation that gets you up every day, that's pretty depressing.
It really is.
I can't imagine what that's like. And
You,
when
you
we need
touched
them, yeah.
you touched on some really interesting points. I want to kind of poke each and every one of them. One is this idea of sports. That was part of your transformation at the trade school. Is that a fair statement? What do you
Oh,
feel like you learned from sports? You kind of set up the structure. I completely agree with that. But what are
yeah.
the actual lessons you learned through it? And maybe kind of tell us why you learned those lessons.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'll never forget, I took on wrestling. I had a friend, and I started academically, I was like, "I'm trying. I'm gonna pass this class, this test," whatever it was. And it became, very passionate about doing well in school. And although when you don't have a foundation, I can study for 5, 6 hours and get a C, a D, and it was brutal. It was, yeah, absolutely brutal. And having to, because never did my parents ever ask me, did you do your homework? Never, never. And so it creates a dependency. And that's what I saw in my family was there was this massive dependency. Everybody, you know, it not just so much dependency on how to survive, you know, but also it was like, okay, you're in trouble. This is how we're going to get you out of trouble. There was no accountability. It was just very toxic. So when I got into sports, it was like a drug. Okay, so wrestling was my first sport, and here I'm going over to. I was thirsty. I was going over to. They back then they had in the vending machines soda machines on school campuses, right? And I was gonna putting change in, and I heard, "Hey, get away from that crap!" And it shocked me, like a shockwave went through my body, he goes, "You don't drink that crap." It was my wrestling coach. He goes, "Mark, you want to do well in wrestling? Eat, nutritious foods. You feed yourself this toxic garbage." And it changed my life forever. That moment, it was like, I don't eat crappy food. I eat healthy food. And then I did well in sports. And that gives you a foundation of resiliency to overcome other challenges in your life. And then you have a purpose, you have a vision, you have a like, I'm gonna do well in my wrestling in my weight division, right? And then you get turned on to other sports where they say, "Hey, you're good at that, but can you be good at this?" Right? Take track. And then your time is occupied all the time, focused on something that gives you purpose.
Was
And
part
so
of it
yeah,
that, somebody believed in you? Somebody was like, "Oh yeah, you're going to be an electrician. Oh yeah, you're going to be an athlete. Oh yeah, you
absolutely,
can do this." Was that a big part
absolutely,
of the change?
absolutely. And that's what I'm talking about with young men specifically. They're getting labeled early, early on, you know, and as a troublemaker, as a disruptive kid in class, whatever. And it's because the testosterone's racing through their bodies. Well, let me say this is now I'm concerned that because of the toxicity of our Western culture specifically, the testosterone levels on many young men is so low. We wonder why they don't have motivation to get out of bed. I mean, this is concerning. I'm writing to, Secretary of Health, Mr. Kennedy, to initiate mandatory blood tests for all kids, for anybody, any male and female for that matter. Even females need testosterone at a fraction, obviously. But the bottom line is that this is a major issue. And I wonder, what is causing that exactly? And I would say that the toxic processed food, culture that we live in, I think that it's something that didn't obviously happen overnight, but generation after generation of this toxicity, it catches up to you, just like drugs, just like drugs. Yeah.
What was the moment in trade school where you kind of had this epiphany that you are no longer the same person as you were before. Was it a single moment where you kind of realized that? Or did you just step on that path on the first day and like, I'm starting a new leaf? Where did that actually happen?
You know what? It did happen when I left Mr. Ostrus's office and I went home and I saw the drugs and the lifestyle of my family friends that I loved and I cared about, obviously. But do a line, have a beer, drink. It's like you got to partake because you belong to this gang. It's a crab bucket mentality, and it's toxic and sick on so many levels. And they're not willing. Hey, I'm going to trade school. I'm excited about this. And there's this crab bucket syndrome. Hey, we're going out. You're either with us or you're not. And they're cutting school, and they're talking about doing things that breaking into you know uh, the convenience store, whatever it might be. There was just a lot of things that weren't healthy. Now, when you find yourself that you're loitering and doing drugs, it's nothing but trouble, right? So it was in that moment that I just decided I don't want to be part of this anymore, and I wanted I wanted to I wanted to qualify to get into that trade school, and I knew that my grades were so poor. And he says, all you got to do is show up and try. We have tutors. We can get you into that school. And that's all I could think about. Right. And that the sports came later because I transferred into high school and, just, I can't remember exactly what it was. It's like, hey, you should wrestle. Somebody just mentioned it. And I'm like, okay, and so here's what I tell my kids. I say, you know what? You can try something. You don't have to be passionate about it or love it, but you're gonna finish the season or you're gonna, and then that's where it's like, okay, it's game on, and I prided myself in putting my kids in every kind of environment where if it was 4-H raising livestock, they learned how to buy at the auction. They kept track of their expenses. They took meeting minutes. They did all of this stuff that was just like business oriented. And this was the best part about it. I went to the fair, the local fair, when they're auctioning off their livestock in their marketing to corporations to come and buy their livestock, right? And they're learning every aspect of business, and the work ethics are extremely high here. And here's what I love in the livestock area at the fair. It says, "Parents, do not help your children." I loved it. I loved it. Yeah, they had to get up at 5:30. They had to clean the stalls and make sure it was presentable to the crowds that were coming in to be inspired by their work. And then the relationships that they develop in this environment, not just on the field playing baseball or soccer or football or whatever the sport might be. Another one was amazing one that I highly recommend is First Tee. First Tee is teaching kids not only the game of golf, but core values. Hole number one is honesty. Hole number two is integrity. Hole number three, and they learn life values and they're out there. It's better than any daycare that you could put them into. If you're two parents working and, during that period of time in the summer when this happens, and man, it's beyond precious. And a lot of parents don't know about these things. A lot of kids don't know about these things. So sitting around loitering, playing video games all day is like, this is my only option.
You're on this new path, but your friends and family are on a different path. What did those interactions look like when you came back to them? Was that challenging?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, I want to say that, I inspired a lot of friends. I'll give you one example. I had a dear friend I've known since fourth grade, and he was strung out, and he was still, very much entrenched in this crab bucket syndrome, you know, gang mentality. And I got into surfing, and I was just like, this is amazing, man. It's better than any drug. And so I would talk to him and I'd say, "Hey, come surfing with me." Absolutely. And then he'd be so excited. Obviously, he was on something, right? Usually it was crank. Crank was a big issue in our life. If you've ever seen Breaking Bad, I can relate to Breaking Bad. Yeah. My family members were the kingpin, and there was meth labs, if you will. And so basically, I would go hunt him down and then he'd just be comatose. I said, "Okay, come on, you said we're gonna go," yeah, another time. So, it took me about 2 years to get him in the water, and it was the most exciting time, it's like, "Yeah, this is great," I had a great time, and, "Alright, let's do it again," and I hadn't heard from him for a while, maybe just about a year. He calls me and he says, "Hey, you wanna go surfing?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. How you doing? How you been? How's Craig? How's Daryl? How's Rodney?" All these guys that, just nothing's changed, it's, I can tell you some horror stories when we get together. And so we're out there at 26th Avenue in Santa Cruz, and he just looks really good. And I said, "How you been?" And I go, "Wait a minute, we're going 26th Avenue. That's pretty advanced surf." He goes, "Yeah, I didn't want to tell you. I've been practicing. I've been practicing." And I go, "How's Craig? How's Rodney? How's And he goes, "I don't talk to them anymore." And I said, "What? Are you kidding me? Are you, because we've known since it's grade school." He goes, "No, I had to get out of that circle, man. I had to get out, and I don't stop smoking, stop doing drugs." And I said, "Oh my gosh, are you kidding me?" It was a cloudy day. The clouds opened up. The beam of lights came through the clouds as we're dropping in on these waves, and these school of dolphin come in and surfing with us on these waves. And I was, oh my gosh, And so we were surf buddies for many, many years. He just recently moved to Nevada. And I go, "You're moving away from the coast? You're moving away from the ocean?" And it broke my heart really because we had so many amazing memories driving up and down the coast looking for surf, and it's not just paddling out and dropping in on waves, it's the journey, right? And I tell people, it's the journey that you're missing out on. We could drive for the whole day and not find the surf. The conditions just aren't right. But it's the journey of that people are missing out on, and you can't get that through a flat screen. You're not
Did
gonna get it.
did he ever come back and kind of share with you what attributed the change, why he took that step?
Oh, no, he said, "Thank you for inspiring me," just like Mr. Ostrus inspired me, in a simple talk, a simple conversation that changed my life forever.
This is to me unbelievable. Because how can one sentence, one thing change a life? It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
My story was I just went on I was doing like a counselor thing, and I got off the bus at the end of the trip, and I was seeing one of the other counselors. She actually got me into it, so we saw each other after the trip, and she's like, "Ari, when you got off the bus, the children started crying."
Wow.
They
Wow, yeah.
realized that that was the last time they would see you. And I was like,
Wow.
okay, so we climbed the mountain together. I encouraged them. I told them some stories. I believed in them. Like I did what
Wow.
any counselor would do. Like, why did this have such a strong effect? And I was just in shock that you could have so much impact on such a small thing to what was to me a
Yeah.
small thing, but it's totally not a small thing. And I don't know, this kind of shocks me. I still feel goosebumps on
Yeah.
what a powerful thing just believing in somebody can be.
Yeah. 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 Especially those that are labeled, I mean, I went through a lot of teachers, counselors, and just, you know, basically one way or another, they said, "You're a worthless piece of shit. Then, you're going to amount to nothing." So when you find somebody that just like Mr. Ostrich, let's just say that, as a counselor, you don't know everybody's background or past and what they're dealing with at home. Right. And if you were going to be in the inner city and these kids were coming from the inner city, I buy, you know, rundown dilapidated kennels with my kids, and we build out premier pet resorts is what we do. And we really enjoy the journey of the before and the after and the work that's involved and the job as the boss, and we just get it done. We worked 32 hours straight not too long ago. We were in Sparks, Nevada, one of our facilities, and a contractor came in and said, "Hey, you know, we're going to have to wait till next spring. You're not ready." And the prices were all over the map, 92,000, and then I said, "We're going to do it ourselves." I'm driving over this mountain to meet with my kids, and my son's like, "Dad, I don't want to do this work. We have never installed artificial turf, and there's a lot involved." I said, "We could figure it out. YouTube it, YouTube it. We're gonna do the work." So I said, "Just get the equipment, just get the material, just get everything lined up. So when I get there, we can just knock it out." And then this guy came in at 31,000. And I said, "Okay." And I looked up their company. And so that's the disparity in prices when you have supply and demand situations going on. And I said, "Did they actually come out to the job site?" Okay. And I'm going to tell you this is that my kids are in their 20s and they own companies, and they work on them where they're self-run and they're very successful. We reach full capacity. So no matter what you're doing in business, the only premise of business is to acquire a client. Then the only other premise is to increase the lifetime value of that patronage, right? Provide more services and, just increase the lifetime value of that relationship. Be, let's just say, ethically exploit. Ethically, you got to be, ethical. Like they'd say, "Oh, I didn't know you did this. I'd love for you to do that, shuttle service for me, or the grooming or the training and all these things that you offer." Basically, back to my story was that I'm driving over and I said, "This landscape construction company that's going to install this turf for 31,000." He goes, "Yeah, Dad." He says, "We're not ready." And I talked to the guy. I said, "Please, you know, we bought this facility in 2020. We had COVID. We had supply chain. We had material inflation. We had nobody wants to work. Went through like 37 employees that we were just hiring anybody that had a pulse, basically. And so we're doing most of the work. And so this was unprecedented on so many levels with many companies experience this, but not just ours. But ultimately in Nevada, there's this massive migration of people leaving California, going to Nevada, specifically Northern Nevada. And so you get stuck in this wheelhouse of just curveballs and things that you just didn't see coming. And so ultimately I said, "Look, we want to get this done. This 1 year project should not have taken 5 years. And we just want to get the resort opened." And he goes, "Okay, look, I'll give you 3 days, but you're not ready. There's a lot of work that needs to be done." And I looked at my boys and I said, "Sons," I said, "we have the weather on our side, we have the equipment, and we have the material. Let's do it." And so 32 hours straight, my three boys and the guy came back out and he was just couldn't believe it. He goes, "Okay, okay, all right, okay." He just couldn't believe that we had done the work. And then he came with his 4 trucks and his 12 guys, and they finished the job. And it went viral. Man, it just went viral. My manager over there says, she called me, says, "Shut it down, shut it down." People were coming from all over. They thinking it was like an open park, you know, pet resort for anybody to just show up and hang out with their dogs, right? And there's a process. You have to make sure they have all their shots and they're socialized and all these things. But my point is this: is that when you raise your kids to understand that foundation, that like a firefighter, my brother-in-law is a firefighter captain. He goes, "We've lowered the bar so much because we're so desperate, and it's causing dysfunction within our unit." And he's on the news saying, "Hey, telling people we're doing the best we can. We're short staffed. We're trying to get there as soon as we can." And so we have something. We got to turn the boat around. We got to turn this boat around. We got to get into a safe harbor on high ground, and that takes. It's not rocket science, right? It's not rocket science. And I apologize. I hope I answered your question, but it's one of those things where this is this toxic environment that we are faced with right now, with 7-8 million men in their prime not working and them being desperately needed. I mean, my buddy, the surfer buddy that moved over to Nevada, he's a glazer. He says work orders are 12 inches thick. We cannot keep up. We are desperate for accountability, for bodies to show up. Then, generally speaking, men are the ones that are in the trades. They got to do the work, and they're just not showing up. And I propose that we can help that migration, get out of this toxic cesspool of life, sitting in front of a flat screen, and move them into vocational training, into trade where they're desperately needed, and they can do quite well for themselves and enjoy it and enjoy the career path that they choose.
It's hard to point to honestly, it's guesswork, right? We're trying to guess what's causing this situation. We see the problem, we understand the problem, we have the numbers. We don't know if it's the screens, we don't know if it's the culture shift that's happening. We don't know. There's like 20 things we can point to and be like, oh, is this part of the problem? The
Yeah.
honest truth is we just don't know. So now it's a question of, well, what should we do? And the question I think is what we can do is, what hat are we putting on? Are we putting a hat on as a, citizen that can write to their congressman or woman? Are we putting on the hat of a dad or a mom? And I think that's where it really starts and ends. So my question
Mhm.
to you, a lot of dads and moms are listening to us. What are the things that you see that you would change tomorrow in regards to parental behavior that you think is maybe contributing to the problem?
Well, I will speak to it from my personal life experience that men didn't have a say. They just they cowered. They just cowered to the pressures of, they throw up their hands and, in my life that they okay, I would say this is that when I was at a restaurant and overheard a conversation with this gal's laughing because her son's, I learned he was 24 because I had to ask, she kept calling, phone call, and they're sitting right next to us. And she's laughing. She goes, he's got my credit card. He's got trouble. He has a flat. He doesn't know what to do. And when my kids were at the youngest age, I go, hey, I have to fix this leak, under the sink. I have to, we're up over the mountain. And I'm said, I know how to put snow chains on. And a woman, like, oh, it's cold out there. Leave him alone. Let him, and I said, you have to be the, the bad guy. I mean, like I had to be the bad guy. And it was tough because I'm going head to head, not only with my spouse, but I'm also going head to head with other family members and other parents and things like that. And I'm like, where where's some backbone here? Because I'm like, look, your kids are gonna be living at home in their 50s and they're gonna be dependent on you for the rest of their life. And I would say that openly, like I see the writing on the wall here, you know, and you raise your kids the way you want to, I'll raise mine. And I was that was I just didn't have uh any reservation to be outspoken that way. And in that context, it was like, my father-in-law, like, hey, we got to get down the road. We're gonna hit major traffic. And it's like he's looking at these bins, they're all labeled. We got to put them in the boat. We got to hook the boat up to the truck and we got to get down the road because if 15, 20 minutes is you're in gridlock traffic getting out of the Bay Area, right? And he's just standing there and he's just numb to the fact that he goes, well, Gloria, she, my mother-in-law organizes the bins and she wants things done a certain way. And I said, we don't have time for that. Right. Man, the fuck. Jesus, I like, oh my gosh. But the thing is that my family members, men, were coddled and pampered. My dad is couch surfing right now. His mom and his sister, they control the finances and they bail him out and they finance his whole life. I have 9 half brothers and sisters, from many different marriages. I got a text, is this Mark Stofer? And I said, I don't, how do I answer this? So I said, yes. He goes, I think we're brothers. I go, another one. So when you grow up in that environment where men just don't have say and women control that environment and they coddle and they pamper and they pacify the situation, there's got to be a man in the house with a man voice that says it's an override. It's like, no, this is not going to be healthy long term.
I was forced to stay a week with my babies when they were, in breastfeeding age. My
Yeah.
wife traveled for her job, and here in the States, you're what is it, like 6 weeks and you're back on the road, right? As opposed to Europe. So here I am with a baby that is, sleeping 3 hours, waking up, breastfeeding, all that. My wife sent me milk over. I was petrified. I was scared. I almost shit my pants. To, but you know, here's the thing that surprised me. That event changed my life because
Cool.
in that moment, I became the number one parent because my wife just wasn't there. Because when she's there, she's the person. At that moment, I became the person. My relationship with my kids forever changed. And I think that's an experience that many men are missing nowadays. They're
Yeah.
not being dads, they're being sidekicks. And, I was, we were living with her parents at the time. And I'm sleep training the kid. And I hear from, she's Lithuanian, so she has this very heavy Soviet Union accent. She's like, and I'm sleep training. So, it's, the child will cry. That's okay. And my mom, Ari, what are you doing to the child? Stop that. I'm like, Leah, I'm being a dad. And then my wife comes up and she's like, oh, my mom's upset. And I'm like,
Oh,
like there's all these pressures coming from
yeah.
all these directions for you to shut up. And then I'm walking down the street with my brother, and I kind of, she's not letting him be a dad. She doesn't listen to him. He has no word. It's like anything he says has no value. And I see him walking down the street, and a balloon, he was holding a balloon, the balloon files off, and he kind of lets go of his child in the cart and chases the balloon. I'm like, what's happening? Why is it that so here's my argument, and I would guess that you would agree, but keep me honest here if you disagree. There is intrinsic conflict between how men and women see the world.
Yeah.
Sure, it's a little stereotypical, but there is intrinsic conflict, right? We see the world differently, we behave differently, we have different strengths, and my argument is that those differences in strengths, they create the whole. And if one of those sides, right, basically says, well, I'm not going to do my job, I'm going to be subservient, I'm not going to bring the value that I'm supposed to bring, it doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm personally seeing. And my wife, she was traveling for a week. She came back and she was suffering with the sleep of the kids. And
Yeah.
she came back and suddenly the kids are going to bed. And she's like, what the like, I went away from a week and you fixed a problem that I've been dealing with for months and months and months. And I can now sleep a whole night. At that
Great
moment,
example.
because you just need to do the shit and you need to be consistent, and the
Yeah.
child cries, like, okay, so it
I love it.
cries, so what? But she came back and her perception shifted, because I think that was one of the moments where she was like, dads do things differently, but it still has value.
Yes.
and
Wow.
and this is like, I get so frustrated. I see friends of mine that just don't have a voice, and they don't think that what they think has any value. And the mothers sometimes don't support that because they haven't seen the evidence and the proof, right? So
Mhm.
I don't know how to solve this, and I don't know how to advise these dads, except to tell them my story of like, look, I was terrified, I went through this, it changed my life. Like, so I
Yeah.
was talking to a friend through one of the communities I volunteer with, participate in, and I told him that story, and I'm like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you a text every morning. You're going to send a compliment to your wife every morning. And then at the end of that week that you've done that, every morning you've complimented her, morning, afternoon, and night, you're going to ask her to take a few days off, and you will be the number one parent. And he's like, oh, I'm like, this is how you do it. And I explained to him all the sales tactics, and he's a sales guy. She's like, oh yeah, that might work. That might work. So I need to send that text, by the way, because I promised I'll send him a reminder every day. And I mean, that's all I can think of. But I mean, there's
Wow.
gotta be something more, that as a society, we can kind of come back to understand that men have a role, and it's not bad or evil to say that men are protectors. It's not a bad thing to say that. Like, that is our
Mhm.
job. When did that become an evil thing? And I got a little bit up on a soapbox, so I apologize. But
No, it's real life. It's real.
it's it
It's real.
resonates with me very strongly, and it kind of pisses me off that we're kind of not doing our job in many cases.
Yeah. And to that, our first daughter, you know, it was brutal. Like, we were zombies and we were up all night. I was making warm cereal, driving her around the block, you know, just pampering, 3 or 4 times a night. And we went to a party, and my wife would be like, "It's your turn," she's just like, "Don't let her cry." And we went to a party, and we looked like zombies. And it's 2 years into it, and we were creating this monster. And I was allowing, because I was allowing it, knowing that this isn't right, but I didn't have the courage to say stops. So it had to be somebody that said, "Is she soiled? Is she hungry?" No. So we were training her to get up 3 or 4 times a night. And then we weren't getting any sleep, and then we're not getting along, and there's no intimacy, and all these kinds of things come into play. And then, oh, let's bring her into the bed between us. And it's like, that is not healthy. Okay. So then we sought counsel. We went to, it was It was somebody that was an expert in this area, and that she says, you don't encourage it like you're encouraging it. You're creating this monster. And she was a brat, man. I mean, a straight up brat. And I wanted a blue cup and just throw the cup and the milk spread all over the table and okay, I'll clean it up, and you're just catering to this monster, right? And so then I said, okay, enough's enough, right? We're going to follow this program. And then you have to be the man of the house. I mean, and yeah, here's the thing I wish I would have learned. I wish I would have learned this. Because I grew up in the environment that I grew up in, I could be very harsh. And I think it's important now. I'm in the pet industry, and I remember I was dealing with a very sensitive dog. And let's just think, your wife is sensitive. All women are sensitive, right? And I would just come at them like a drill sergeant. That's not right. And to reach their heart and their mind. So you have to approach them like the most, sensitive dog, which you walk in the room and some dogs that you're trying to train to be service dogs, they submissive pee. Just you and your presence as a man, as your size, your voice, they submissive pee. Those are really tough to finish, to train to be a service quality dog. And I wish that I had taken that into consideration with my kids and my relationship with my wife, because I was abrupt and I was like, stops now. And I was just, there's no discussion about like ripping the cables out of the wall and taking all the electronics. And it was abrupt.
So this is a hard balance to align to kind of get right. On the one hand, the kind of strength, you need that, and then to kind of be like, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try this. We're going to do
Yeah.
this experiment. We're going to learn from it. We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to keep on going. We're going to get better. But then you
Yes.
don't want to cross the line of kind of diminishing the intrinsic motivation in the process. That's a very fine line. I feel like
Yeah.
I sometimes tread on the wrong side of it, even today. And my kids are, well, the two older ones are doing wonderfully. I'll brag about them a little later, but the young one is still on his journey, and he's showing me, he's putting me through the ringer. But
Yeah.
I fail and keep making mistakes on that line even today. What is the advice? Because it's really easy to just go to the extremes on either side, and kind of that's not good. But you
Yeah.
want to be in a good place in the middle, right? The golden path. How
That,
do you do that? What does that look
yeah.
like? When do you know
Wow.
that you've crossed too far?
Well, I've crossed too far many times. And, I would say that my oldest son is a mama's boy. He always just, ran to mom. Like when we're out there and I'm working side by side with my daughter, and we're framing, she puts the bags on, she sets the pace. Okay. And then she's like, where's Kevin? Where's Kevin? Where's Kevin? Because we got to finish the job. We got to finish a project that we're working on. And he would always just kind of just disappear. Like, I got to go to the bathroom. And then, so he would always, and he's having a conversation with mom. And I'm like, how are you allowing this? Because you realize that we have to get this done. It's getting dark, all these things. And, oh, we were talking, and that just that innocent, holier than thou, soft spoken presentation makes it okay. No, it doesn't make it okay. We're on a project that you want done. Your daughter's yelling at me. Where's her brother, who should be so and I grabbed him and I said, stop, disrespecting, fucking with me. I was so angry. And the look of on his eyes, it's like he took this, he's sensitive. He's sensitive. And my wife comes, stop, stop, you're like, and I said, man, I want to throw my fist through the wall and just say, I need you outside. We got to get this done. So that is not the approach to take. And, to keep your frame and to hold your composure. I learned to reach my son's heart and mind. I had to say, lower my tone, like, hey, Kevin, we're on a timeline here. We're really struggling, and we need your help. You have to be on the other end of the material to install it, and your sister's waiting for you, and I'm working on this other end over here, and she keeps calling me over, and it's very inefficient. And I was trying to explain that, I don't care if you're going to build a chair, skyscraper, or freaking city. There's only four costs involved. There's time cost, there's material cost, there's labor cost. The only other cost is frustration. And frustration is the biggest cost. It's like, okay, let's synchronize here. So we're not going in circles. On let's just stay out of the eye of the storm. We have to synchronize so that we can navigate the storms of life and get to the destination with his least amount of unnecessary pain and suffering, right? So to answer your question, I'd say this is that I have an alpha kid, and that's the way we're drill sergeants. He puffs his chest out, and we yell at each other, but that's how we get the job done, right? That's the environment I grew up in on a construction site. But with sensitive ones, you have to slow it down, you have to tone it down to reach the heart and mind to start to build that synchronizing emotion. And the same with your spouse is to say, there's a saying that's, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? You know, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be both. I'm not going to argue when I know I'm right.
Yeah.
And it's not an argument. It's saying, I see what's going on here. Now there's 78 million men in their prime. Is it the men that are pampering them, coddling them, pacifying them? Who's allowing them to live under their roof, and not be a better, more productive, have a meaningful life with purpose, and what allows that to happen? Like a lot of men in my family, my father, my dad, and my uncles, and the dependency that it creates is not healthy, and it does not end well. When you got to yell at your kids to take out the garbage once a week and they're 30, 40, 50 years old, that's pretty
So
pathetic, man.
you don't
So
want that.
and so the thing is this is that I think the answer to your question is really approaching people based on their personality, but the boundaries are the boundaries. The you know the expectations that are fair and reasonable are fair and reasonable. And somebody's got to be the bad guy in those situations because for the health of the entire relationship, right? It's not just for you personally to make sure that you're sending the next generation off into a foundation of resiliency to take on the challenges of life. It's going to affect their kids and their kids.
Yeah. I, one thing that I learned is that the communication between the parents and the support between the parents is incredibly important because if the dad's saying A and the mom's saying B and that message is not aligned, then
Yeah.
the kids are basically going to be like, well, I'll do whatever I want. But the second that message aligns, it becomes very tough for them not to align themselves. That's a huge frustration that I think we cause ourselves. And I always say that, heaven and earth is, heaven and hell is on earth and we create it for ourselves,
Yeah.
100%.
Oh,
And many
well
times
said.
parents are doing that to themselves. I think like if,
Yeah.
if the dads and moms that are listening today just figure out how to communicate, and align yourselves with each other on how you should behave with the kids, God, you're going to save yourself so much frustration. So that's a small piece of advice
Oh,
that I
yeah.
would I would
Yeah.
give.
One of the things there was a father that came to me with he was struggling with some stuff, and he realized my stance on things. And listen, my kids are in their 20s and they're very successful. Okay, my son's 22, just bought a company. He got financed. He took care of the business plan, the projections, the resume, the everything that was required to get the SBA loan to purchase this company. And now he's doing very, very well, and he's growing that company. And he's reaching that full capacity, and he understands marketing, right? He understands marketing. And so it's not hard to promote a company. And because they learn that in 4-H too, right? They learn that in all of their sports and everything, that the job's a boss, and they're knocking out the details. And I'm so proud to work beside them. And now it's like they set the pace, and I come alongside them and like, where can I help? What can I do? And it's beyond precious. It's a kiss from God. And I think all parents should have that experience, with their children, and not a matter of dependency on you for the rest of their life. It's like, no, you've you've done well to pass the wand and to see that they have the foundation in place to do quite well and to tackle the challenges of life. But I would say this is that a guy came beside me and said, "Man, what do I do? Like I don't have a say in my life." It's like, and he said something to the fact that like it was during 2007 crash. It was like, hey, the market's going to crash, and I'm at that age where I can't retire. We got to sell the house, before it gets any worse. And but his wife says, no, I don't want to sell the house. But that's what they agreed on. They agreed that they were going to sell the house. But then she changed her mind. And he goes, but we have a policy in our family that we don't move forward unless we both agree. And I said, Clark, listen to what you just said. You don't move forward. Like you're on a boat. You see the white caps, the cloud formation. You see the storm on the horizon. You're going out to deep water. You're screwed. You're committed to be in the eye of this storm that's coming. And now is when you turn the boat around and you're saying, well, we have a policy. If we don't both agree, then we don't do. And I said, well, you've made a decision. You've agreed, and you're going to go in the eye of storm, and you're not going to retire because you have this massive mortgage, and so obviously it didn't end well, but he didn't have the courage to turn the boat around. He didn't have the courage to say, this is what we agreed on. This is what we're going to do. And, whatever counseling you have to go to navigate the details of all of that stuff, what it was is he was right. He was right. They should have sold the house. They should have moved on and found, their retirement. It was their chapter in life where they would then afford a retirement, right? Because he didn't have the courage or the courage to stand up to what was happening. He was handcuffed to a very unfortunate situation. Now, I would say that that's where, men in my life, they just threw their hands up and just, they just cowered, and they didn't know how to approach their spouse or lovely other, that we love our grandma, we love our moms and whatnot. But I'll give you a story. A police officer comes home and he sees that his house is full of merchandise that's his wife and his daughter are shoplifting. And he's a police officer. And he says, hey, this has got to stop. Is it enough? There's no more of this, right? Well, they just ignore him and they keep doing it. This is a true story. And then there was a search warrant. They were followed. There was a search warrant. They got into the house, and his picture was on the local front page of the local newspaper. He
Of
lost his
course.
job.
Of
He lost
course.
his pension. He lost it. So what I'm saying is we all have to think of ourselves as that police officer in our lives, raising our family and having a say, because there was no question whether he was right. And so my grandmother died with 4 fake IDs. My aunt and my grandmother, they were into shoplifting, insurance scams, identity theft. They were into it big time. My grandfather found some paperwork. It was a social security number, and he flipped out, man. And this has got to stop. My uncle was somebody you did not want to cross paths with. It was a shit show. My mom, my aunt, it was just a shit show. But my grandmother was at the helm of it all. And my grandfather would just throw his hands up and just, he would go get on a ship and travel and deliver oil. He was a merchant marine. And I think and it didn't end well. My uncle was murdered, not murdered, but killed by distant relatives, cousins, if you will. And so what it comes down to is this: is that it could be as simple as, hey, the kids are not allowed to watch video games throughout the week, and on the weekend, if their grades are good, that they earn that right. And then the chores that we do. My kids were on stools. This was your week to do dishes. We are all working together. This house has to be clean all the time because we're on display. We have customers coming. We have employees and all these kinds of things. And they learned to pick up after themselves. We were not their servants. Their room was clean. And here's the thing: I had to quit my job. This is how serious it becomes. I'm a testimony to what it takes. I said, I quit. Everything's running amok. You're allowing all these things to happen. The kids are watching TV. They're going over to a friend's house. I said, our daughter's going to be traveling around the world as a brain surgeon, and our kids are going to be living in their 50s over my dead body. So I quit, and I became the full-time dad. And I went military. I got rid of all the stuff. Their overwhelming room was just, you say, clean your room. It's like deer in the headlights. They couldn't even imagine. And they could spend hours, and then it looked like a train wreck. And so I did a military thing. I had shirts, socks, underwear, shirts, pants, 3 drawers. And then in the closet was all their sporting gear for that season, right? And I said, if I ask you to clean your room, it's going to take you 10, 15 minutes. And it streamlined everything. And then the house was always clean. I'm meticulous about keeping the house clean, and less is more, less is much, much better. And so, but here's what I would say is that I had all this extra time when I put them in school. I'm like, oh my gosh, the house is clean, you know, all the chores are basically done. And I'm like, oh, I can go surfing. I can, I mean, it was funny because my aunt, oh my gosh, my aunt would close all the windows and she would watch soap operas all day long. Her husband was a mechanic, and he loved his alcohol and he loved women. And ultimately, my aunt, though, she didn't work. She was a stay-at-home mom, and during the summer, she'd watch us. And then, half an hour before he comes home, she'd open the windows and we'd be stuffing all the clothes under the bed and make it look like the house was clean. And she'd be sweating like she'd been working all day. And, she melted into this couch. It formed her body. You know what I mean? She gained all this weight, and, it was just, it was toxic. It was sad and toxic. And she'd be yelling and screaming like, hurry up and get the vacuum and da da da, all this kind of stuff. And but it was just a hoard fest of stuff in this house. And he'd come home and, like, dinner should be ready, and that was the presentation. That was, if you look behind the curtain and saw what it wasn't healthy and didn't end well, right? So I think we should avoid that, in our life. Is that, yeah, I went military. I kept it really, really simple, and it actually made that was my wife at the time, it made her really angry. Like I had, when you watch movies, sitcoms, men are stupid. You watch commercials, you watch sitcoms, you watch movies, and men are trying to take, like you did, and you took on that role. And it's like, oh, you're going to fail miserably because there's not a woman in the environment to make it right. Come on, man. Really? I guess because I was at a very young age, I would overhear all the stuff that my aunt and my mom and my grandmother and my uncle were into. And then everything, when my grandfather entered the room, everything was staged. Like it wasn't happening. The insurance scams and all these shoplifting and all this kind of stuff that was happening. And it was a facade. And when you see that so much, and then marrying into a family, a Christian family, where I remember telling my wife, I said, we went through a lot of counseling. And I said, I can't compete with your presentation, because your soft spoken, holier than thou, innocent presentation isn't truth. You know, it's not truth. You're twisting the fabric of truth to get your way. And I'm navigating the repercussions of that. And we have neighbors threatening to sue. We have county officials red tagged on issues. I'm saying, I do not agree. I do not agree. I do not agree. And the more I say I do not agree, the walls get higher and thicker. And I'm like, how do I have a say in this house without being this monster? You have to contend with that. But I would say that when you're dealing with somebody that is, I said, I hear all the worship music. It's like you're a bulldozer with a million crosses, and your worship music's so loud, but it's still doing the damage, right? It's still doing the damage. And you're saying, just look the other way. In my life, it was like, look the other way or else. Like that police officer that was coming home to all that shoplifting, his wife and daughter were saying, look the other way or else. And I'm proposing that men should take the or else and do it in such a way with grace, and not with, I made a mistake. And I look back and I go, I wish I had the right frame. I wish I had the right presentation. I don't think there's the perfect presentation, but there is a presentation that says, I care too much to look the other way. I love you too much to ignore and deny what is obviously the wrong direction for how to navigate the storms of life. And how do you turn that boat around? Like, literally, how do you turn the boat around, get into a safe harbor on high ground where you can all agree to disagree, right?
Right, right.
And
I
then,
haven't figured out the right answer, but I think that the first step is just acknowledging that you don't know. And if you just acknowledge that yes, I need to be strong. Yes, I need to do the right thing, but also, yes, I need to figure out how to communicate this in a way that I'll be heard, and
yeah,
that will be a team, and that I'm not going to do this right. And I need to figure out where, when I'm making a mistake, I need to catch that. I need to apologize. I need to acknowledge
Yeah.
that I can do the right thing the wrong way. Like, I think as long as you have that mindset that you're making
Yeah.
mistakes and that you're not holier than thou, and that I
Yes.
am not perfect. I'm making mistakes right now, and tell
Yeah.
me and I will try to adjust. So as long as you have that mindset, I think that's probably the best I figured out how to do. If anybody in our audience has a better suggestion, please call Mark and me so
No,
we can learn.
I've done my share of asking for forgiveness. I
Yeah.
really have. With my oldest son, he doesn't talk to me. There's things that I'm seeing that I don't agree with. And perfect example is my middle son and my younger son were tracking quite well. My oldest son had the grunge look, and he's driving a car that's just short of a death trap, and he's living under his mommy's roof. And I said, "Over my dead body, I care too much, son. You're no." And like, "Dad, you don't have a say." And I said, "You think? You don't think I have a say?" I was hard on you because I didn't realize and I didn't approach him the way I should have. I was a drill sergeant when trying to approach a very sensitive young man. And I didn't understand that. And so, I apologized to him. I said, I did my best and you're going to be a better man than me, you know? And so, but he still keeps his distance. But at the same time, I'm seeing his lifestyle that concerns me. And he got into the THC thing and he's working with Uncle Billy up in the ranch and, they're doing, and I just go, oh gosh. And I said, son, whatever you decide to do, you have to take everything that comes with it. When I go up there and see Uncle Billy with a pistol on his side, and I'm like, what's going on? And he goes, oh, the mafia's moving and, everybody's growing. And, it was just, I go, son, you really don't want to go down this rabbit hole. And I know it's attractive because there's money and all this talk that's going on. I said, I lived it. It's not healthy. But ultimately, that venture didn't work out. And then he's moving at home with mom. And then he's looking like he's homeless. I said, look, you're not living at home. You're not living off my blood, sweat, and tears over my dead body. So I'm coming. The wrath of dad is coming. It just like, don't, don't test me on this. Right now. It wasn't long before he was working 12-hour days, 7 days a week on a job and, working with my daughter and her husband built out a pet resort in Hollister, California. And I said, what I'm trying to say though is ultimately is that I care too much to not address something. And if I don't have the perfect presentation and that's my downfall, then so be it. So be it.
Mark,
My
we
heart's
have
my heart's in the right place. Period. If your heart's in the right place, I guess that's what the bottom line is that if your heart's in the right place to make a positive impact in the lives of your children or others, and it's not being you're not being malicious in any way, and there's no personal gain to you that you're like, okay, it's what's my what's my gain in this situation, this relationship, then I think that is the only answer. That is only you know solution to moving forward and seeing growth, positive, healthy growth. Is it? Yeah. That's my take.
Mark, we have only one scripted question on this show, but it's a hard one, and I kind of promised this to you up front. It's our closing question. If you had to go back to the hardest points in your life, whether it 5 minutes ago, 10 days ago, or in your 20s, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, yes, just to be more sensitive to others and approach people based on their personality. And yeah, that's what I would say is that was my downfall. It's my presentation it was never quite glamorous. It was too harsh at times. And yeah, to be more sensitive and to approach people and understand their background's not my background and their challenges aren't my challenges, and I can't truly understand the depth of what what they might be going through is to be sensitive to that. That's the advice I would give if I was to go back.
Mark, thank you genuinely from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for being
Gnarly.
so honest and transparent and sharing your story with our audience today. I hope that, your story will inspire people to, that it's just that 5 minutes that changes a life. And
Yeah.
I truly believe that that can happen, and I've seen it happen, and that's part of the reason why we do this show. So thank you so much for joining today. I appreciate
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. It is an honor, really.
Thank you,
Enjoy your
sir.
content very much. Thank you, sir.